Hey guys, what's going on? It's Jay, and what I got for you today is the Nikon Z5 II Beginner's Guide. So first of all, congratulations on your new camera. Most likely you just got the Z5 II and you are here to learn how to use it, and that's exactly what I'm going to teach you how to do. Now, it's going to be beginner oriented, guys. So for the more advanced users that have used cameras in the past, you can skip ahead a little bit to the more, advanced modes and settings and things like that, because this is going to start from the perspective of absolutely nothing. So I'm going to show you how to put the battery in, memory card, and all sorts of stuff like that. So again, there'll be timestamps below in the description area, so you can skip ahead if you don't want to see the more really simplistic stuff. But for those that are brand new to cameras, this might be your first hardcore camera. It might even be your first camera. So I try to come from that perspective with my videos. So this is what came in the box. I actually got it with the 24 to 200 millimeter lens, as a kit. So that's the lens I got here. You might have got it with the 24 to 50 millimeter kit lens. It's, it just depends on what package you decided to go with. So I'll show you that in a minute, but this is basically what comes in the box. It does have a very basic user manual. It's kind of like that fold out style. So it's not like an actual book, but it's pretty cool that they have it. It'll show you the camera parts and stuff like that. So it's nice that it at least comes with some kind of manual. Now it also has a lens little pouch here, so you can put the lens in there if you want. That's what this is. Now this is the USB-C charging cable. So it's a USB-C to USB-C. It does not come with a wall charger, guys. So I have a awesome wall charger that will also do PD power, linked below in the description area. It's made by Anker. It's a really good quality one, but it's not very expensive at all. So I highly recommend getting that, and then you can just plug one end into the charger and the other end into the camera. I actually have a USB cable and charger already set up here, so I'll show you how to charge the battery in a moment. But that's what this is, the USB cable. You could also use this to connect to your computer if you want to use the camera as a USB camera. And you can also use it to transfer files from the camera to your computer as well. So it's also a data cable, not just for powering. So this is the actual neck strap for the camera, and it actually weaves through these little neck strap connectors here on the side of the camera. So I'm not going to actually put that on right now, but I do highly recommend putting this on once you get outside and stuff. It'll definitely help from, dropping the camera and things like that. So it just has straps that basically weave through these little connectors here. It's very easy to put on, not a big deal at all. You can see the battery here, and that's going to go in the bottom of the camera. I will show you that in a second. So let's just go over this camera body really quick. All right, so I just wanted to give a big thanks to BH Photo Video for allowing me to borrow this gear. They loaned it to me, which was awesome, so I really appreciate that. It allowed me to make this content for you, and it allowed me to go down to the city with all this cool gear and learn it, have fun with it, and stuff like that. So again, huge shout out to BH Photo Video. What we got here is on the top, we have a mode dial. So by default, it is in auto mode. So you can turn this to change the camera modes. And you have program auto, shutter speed priority, aperture priority, and full-fledged manual mode for maximum power and control. Then you have user presets. So user presets are cool because you could use any of these creative modes here, shutter, aperture, or manual. Set the camera up however you want, and then you can save it as one of these user preset modes. So that's what those U1, 2, and 3 are. Now over here we have a creative picture style button here. So if you click this, it'll give you film simulations and stuff like that. So it's a good way to play around and get some cool looks to your photos if you want to do that. Especially if you're more beginner oriented, you can kind of find the look that you like. And this is a lot of fun. There's a ton of presets in there. Now up here we have the shutter button. So this button here, this is a two-stage button, guys. So when you press it down, it'll actually focus the camera when in photo and video mode. And when you press it all the way, it'll take a photo in photo mode. It won't really do anything when you press it all the way in video mode. It just focuses. To record video, you have a video record button here. It's a dedicated button right there. Now you also have a button for your ISO, which is the sensor gain or sensor sensitivity. You have exposure compensation. That's what this button is. So that will allow you to manipulate the exposure of the camera either lower or higher depending on your situation. Sometimes you might need to shift it one way or another. It's just a nice tool to have. A lot of physical buttons on this camera. Now looking at the front here, you have two more function buttons. You have one function 1 here and function 1, 2 that can be custom configured to whatever you want. This button here on the front is the actual lens release pin. I'll show you that in a second when we mount the lens. Now looking at it from the back, we have this really awesome viewfinder. So when you put your eye up to there, there's a sensor on the top here that will see that your eye is close, and it'll activate the viewfinder. So that's what that is. On the side of the viewfinder, there's actually this button here, and you can hit this button to toggle between the viewfinder and the monitor. So you can force it to just use the monitor or the LCD screen, or you can force it to just use the viewfinder, or you can have it switch automatically, which is where it is by default. Now up here we have the release mode or the drive mode. So this is where you can go to set the camera for rapid fire shooting for sports and stuff like that, or self timer. That's where that is in there. You got a garbage can there that's, you know, used for deleting photos and stuff when in playback. Now over here we have a nice toggle switch, so you can easily toggle between video and photo. That's what that is. And then there's a display button here, and when you press this, it'll cycle through different display modes, whether you're using the viewfinder or the LCD screen. There's all these different preset like screen modes with various amounts of information and stuff on them, so you can cycle through with the display button. Then you have an AF on button here, which acts as focus. So when you press this, it'll like autofocus for you, very similar to when you press the shutter button. So some people just like using their thumb for that. Back button focus works really good. Below that, you have a nice joystick here that you can move the autofocus areas around with, or you could use it to navigate through the menu, for example. Now the I button will bring you into the I menu, which is a quick menu that just has like key features. So it's like just like a shortcut to like key features basically. And that's what the I button does. Now this is just a directional pad here you can use to navigate the menu. And there's an OK button there in the center. So that's what I'm going to press when you have to like select something and hit enter. I'm going to hit the OK button just so you guys know. And when I'm in the menu, I'm going to use this directional pad to navigate around in the menu. So here is the menu button, playback button, and now you have a zoom in and a zoom out, so you can easily zoom in and zoom out and check your photos and stuff when you're in the playback area. And you can also use that to zoom in when taking photos and stuff in manual mode, for example, if you're manually focusing. Now right here is a little hole there, it looks like, but it's actually a light. That will let you know if it's writing data to the memory card. That'll be blinking just to let you know that data is being written to the memory card. So definitely don't take your memory card out when that light is lit. Looking at it on the side here, guys, we have this awesome grip, first of all, and there's a dial on the front of the grip here I forgot to mention. So that's the secondary command dial, and this is your main command dial here, like so. So on the side here, if you scoot this back, that will open up the dual memory card slots. Now the memory card I use is this one right here. It's a SanDisk Extreme Pro V90 card. So it's a UHS 2 compliant card, and that's what these slots are. They are both UHS 2 slots. So what that means is they're fast. So UHS 2 reads and writes faster than UHS 1 cards. So when you're shopping for cards, I'll leave a link below for this card, by the way. But when you're shopping for cards, you might notice the UHS 1 cards cost like a fraction. They're like a quarter of the price of the UHS 2s, and that's because they don't read and write as fast. Now, the advantage to the UHS 2 card is especially when you're shooting sports, for example, the buffer of the camera will fill up if you're continuously shooting. You know, think about rapid fire, like brr, brr, brr. Eventually the buffer will fill up if you are shooting like crazy. And the faster memory card you have, the faster the buffer will clear. If the buffer fills up, your camera will not be able to keep shooting in that really high continuous frame rate mode. So it'll actually slow down because the buffer is full. That's where the UHS 2 memory cards come in, because it can just write that data off the buffer to the card and keep you going for more successful rapid fire shooting in sports and stuff like that. So another advantage to the UHS 2 cards is when you're offloading the data to your computer, and it'll actually read the data off the card much faster, and so you can transfer the files much faster. And 4K 10-bit 422 videos file sizes are quite large, so you're talking a couple gigs depending on how long you're recording, so it'll transfer much faster to your computer if you're using a UHS 2 card. So I highly recommend getting those. So looking at the back here, I just wanted to show you this LCD screen quickly. Sorry for all the fingerprints on it. So this is a really nice LCD screen. It's actually a touch screen also, and it swivels around, so you could use it in selfie mode. If you have the camera faced like towards you, you'd be in selfie mode like that. And you can also swivel it like this if you have the camera low to the ground. This is how I'm going to be using it in the lab here to show you how the camera works and stuff. And you can also tilt it this way so you can have the camera like over your head. So this is a very versatile screen, and you can close it this way also to have the screen out. But I do recommend closing it the other way, especially when you're putting it in your camera bag, so you have that nice hard, plastic protection here. Kind of like, I call it armor mode, but just, you're protecting the screen. God forbid something gets loose in your camera bag and ends up scraping the screen when you're walking around or something. So highly recommend always putting it away like this. All right, so looking at the bottom here, we have the 1/4-20 thread. You could use that to mount tripod plates and stuff like that. And it's got these other holes for the larger tripod plates so they won't twist. That's what these holes are for. Over here, we have the battery door. And this is a really nice one. It actually auto locks when you just close it like that. So I really like the auto lock feature. And when you open this up, you could see that's where the battery goes. Now there's also this little notch right here. You can see this little rubber thing. That's if you want to use a dummy battery. You can actually route the cable out of that notch there. So a dummy battery is kind of like the shape of a regular battery, and it has like a cord coming off of it. So that's what that little thing is for there. Now the battery goes in this way. It just slides in like so. So when you pop the battery down, you'll watch that little yellow lock lever. See how it's swung over? And that's what holds the battery in. So you just push that and it'll pop up and you can take the battery out. So anyways, we'll just throw that back in there. Locks in like so. Then we can close the battery door. And now I will show you the ports on the side and we'll get this thing charging. So underneath this door, we have the USB-C port and we have a micro HDMI port. And then up here, we have the headphone jack and the mic jack. That's what those are. Nice rubber doors here. So we're going to need to charge this. So we're going to use the USB-C port right here. Got my cable right here, and we're just going to plug that in like so. And you will see the orange light light up. Once it starts charging, it takes a second to just make sure the voltage is good and everything. And there you have it. So you can see the orange light. And that light will go out when the battery is fully charged. So now that we got the camera charging, I'm just going to leave that charge because this tutorial is going to be quite long and I don't want to kill the battery. So I'll just leave that in there for now. But this is the front camera body cap. And you just basically turn that to take it off like so. And this is the full frame sensor. Now be careful, you don't want to leave the sensor exposed like ever. So make sure you put a lens on right away or you put the battery cap on right away. And let me show you what it looks like mounting this lens. Now, this is the 24 to 200 millimeter. And if you look, you'll see there's this white dot on the top of the lens. And there's a white dot on the flange right here, the Z-mount flange. And so basically you just line those dots up like that and then twist and it locks into place. And you can hear it lock, that's that lens pin. So right here, this button here will release it. That's what this button does. So if I turn this, check this out, you can see the little pin there. See that pin? That's what's locking the lens on, like so. Now we have the lens mounted, and this is a zoom lens, so you just turn this to zoom it, like so, 24 to 200. So quite a bit of zoom on this lens, for sure. I'm just gonna take off the lens cap here. Then we have the lens hood. Lens hood goes on like that. Make sure you put the lens hood on so it helps protect the front of the lens. In addition, I highly recommend getting a protective UV filter for the front of your lens. You absolutely want to protect your investment. If you look at the front of your lens, it will have a number on there, like this one right here. It says 67, so that is the filter thread for the front of the lens. And that's the size filter you would need to put on, to protect the glass. I have one linked below. It's a really good one. It doesn't cost much at all. And you definitely don't want to scratch that glass. So anyways, I'm just going to leave this off for now. And one other thing I wanted to show you is the body cap and the lens cap can actually go together. So you can put them together and twist it so you don't lose them. So they actually marry up. Keep those together like so. One other thing I wanted to show you is the hot shoe here. This little plastic thing comes off on the top. It's a little hard to get off, and you can hook up like flash units and stuff. That's what this is for. Audio, microphones and things like that can go here. So that's what that's for. And lastly, right here, this little guy here is the diopter, it's called, and that will adjust the viewfinder for your vision. So you might have to turn that if the viewfinder looks blurry. Just play with the diopter until it gets nice and sharp for you. That's what that does. So now we're going to turn this thing on, but first let me swivel the screen out here like so, and I'm just going to turn this on. All right, guys, I just wanted to take a second to thank the sponsor of this video, and that is you. You guys are the sponsor of this video. That's right. So, you know, you guys are the ones that watch the video. You guys are the ones that ask questions in the comments area, which helps people that are also asking questions and trying to learn. And you guys are the ones that use my affiliate links, which is a huge support to the channel and to me. So I really appreciate it. Like I said, using those affiliate links is better than getting a sponsor, in my opinion, because I prefer you guys to be the sponsor of this video. So anyways, thanks again, and let's get on with the video, shall we? And there we go. All right, so we are in auto mode, and I have the camera in photography mode here. So when I press the shutter button down, you can see on the eye there, it's actually lining up to the human. So it's detecting the human automatically, and you can see that little box on the eye. And if I press the shutter all the way down, it'll take the photo. So this little icon down here is called touch shutter, and you could basically just touch anywhere you want on the screen. It'll focus automatically and take the shot. So that's pretty cool. And when you touch that, you can actually cycle and turn it off. So now touch shutter is off. So now if you touch, it's not going to do anything. You could cycle it again, and now we just have focus point. So you can move the focus point around, and you can see that little box. It's kind of moving around there. If you press it again, it's touch AF. So if you touch, it'll just move and focus where you touch, like so. And if we put it back to touch shutter, it will actually take the photo for you. So that's what that little button does. And remember how I said there's this display button on the back of the camera? If you press the display button, it'll change the way the screen looks, like how much information you see. This screen has the auto leveler on there. You could see that green line showing that it's level. This screen pretty much shows nothing. This screen here will show you just the basic settings of the camera, which is quite nice. And now we're back to the normal screen. Now remember that button on the back, the I button. I just wanted to show you that quick. When you press the I button, this is that little menu that comes up that I was telling you about earlier. And so you have a couple different options here. You have picture control, you have image quality, image size, you have focus area. So focus area is how much of the sensor you're going to use to actually autofocus, and you can change that. By default, it's going to use the whole sensor, but you could limit the focus area to much smaller areas if you want, which gives you much more precision control, because sometimes the camera focuses on what you don't want. And that the way to combat that is to select your focus area to like a smaller area, and then you can move it around with the joystick and get it to focus on exactly what you want. I'll show you that in a minute. Then you have autofocus mode, so you can have it set to continuous shooting, which is what you would want to use for sports, or you could have it in AFA, which will automatically switch between continuous shooting and single shot. Single shot is what I normally use when taking photos of still subjects. That's what AFS is. And I focus, see that little green dot on the eye? It's kind of hard to see, but it's right there on the eye. I could now move the camera, and you could see the focus point is following. So it's going to maintain that focus point even though I'm moving the camera. That's what AFS does. It allows you to focus and then like recompose the scene, and then when you press the shutter all the way, it'll take the shot. When you have it in autofocus continuous, for example, it will just lock onto the eye, and if I move the camera around, it's going to stay on the eye because it's continuously autofocusing. Autofocus single pretty much locks on once it turns green. So, and that's kind of what the focus mode does. And AFA will switch automatically between AFS and AFC. So you're probably better off just leaving it in AFA if you're a beginner, but if you want more power, you can control it there. And then if you want to manually focus, Sometimes you need manual focus when autofocus just won't work for whatever reason, and you can switch it to manual focus, and then you can actually dial in the focus, by hand on the lens itself. I'm just going to leave that in A there. Now here we have tone mode, you have SDR, which is what we're used to normally seeing, and then HLG is hybrid log gamma, I believe it stands for, and it's more of a high dynamic range look, so you can play around with that if you want. Now here is vibration reduction. It's on by default, and you have sport mode. So sport is optimized if you're tracking like a moving subject and you're moving the camera a lot. On is if your subject is kind of static and you're just hand holding, trying to keep it as stable as possible. So it depends on what you're doing. If you're like tracking like a moving subject, put it in sport mode and it'll do a better job for you. Now here is custom control shooting. You can go in here and this is where you can customize the camera. And if you scroll around, you'll see there's tons of buttons all over the camera that you can actually customize and control. So a lot of customization options in here. And you can just go back by hitting that little back button there. So let me just go up here to image quality. So right now it is set to normal. I'm going to set it to fine. So if you're shooting JPEG, this will be the best quality option right there, JPEG fine. Now if you're a RAW shooter, you can go in here and set the image quality to RAW, which is actually what I usually use. I pretty much use RAW most of the time, but you do have to process the photos after the fact, like on a computer, because the RAW files come out like flat looking, so you have to add the contrast and the saturation and the sharpness and stuff. If you're using JPEG mode, which is what I recommend you do if you're a beginner, the camera does all the processing for you and it just pumps out like a final result that looks awesome. And that's pretty much what that does. And then you can change the size of the JPEG to large, medium, or small. So if you don't need the full resolution, you can set it to medium, for example, and get more memory card space. Now, autofocus area, let's just go over that real quick while we're in here. So you can go up and down here in this area, and on the bottom is your subjects. So you can go to the right here and select individual subjects if you need to. Or you can set it to off if you don't want subject recognition. Sometimes you want that because you don't want it to focus on humans. If you're like holding a product up, for example, and you want it to focus on the product, but your face is in the scene, that's where you would want to turn this off. So by default, I just like having it on the auto selection. So it'll pick between dogs, humans, birds, whatever. Now, if you go up here, these are your different areas. So 3D is like a tracking mode, and it'll just put a dot up in like you could move it around with the joystick, but this is like a tracking dot. So once you select it, it'll basically track your moving subject like really effectively. So that's what the 3D does. And if we go back in here, we can change the area to WC2 is custom, WC1 is custom. You can change the shape. So this is going to be basically a wide area, as you can see here, and now you can move it around. So that red box is going to limit the focus to that area. So that's the focus area, the red box itself. So if we go in there and we go to wide 2, you'll see it's a vertical line. So this is helpful if you want to limit the focus for some reason in like a vertical line like this. Now if we go to just wide L, this is just going to give you like a pretty big box that you could move around. And again, this is just limiting the focus area to that red box. So it's very helpful if the camera keeps focusing on stuff you don't want it to focus on. And this is airplane mode if you want to turn that on and off. And then over here is memory card info. So I'm just using slot 1 is where I put the SD card in. There is 2 slots there, so you could use either slot, doesn't really matter. So if you are using dual memory cards, you can have the slot 1 set to main, slot 2 set to backup, or you can have slot 2 set to overflow. So once the first one fills up, it'll then overflow to the second slot. Now, you cannot dual record video to both cards, but you can dual record photos. So it's capable of doing photos dual, but not video, just so you guys are aware. So let me switch this into video mode really quick, just to show you how that works. So when you're in video mode, you could see now we have the audio bars here on the bottom. So you can see that, you're picking up sound. And on the top, you have the recording time. And up here, you have how long it will record with the current settings that it's currently set to. So if I hit the I menu here, you can actually go in and now you can set your frame size. So this is similar to, you know, how the JPEG options were in the photo mode when you went into the iMenu. So if you go in here, you can set it to 4K 60, 4K 25. This is 4K 24. That's what I like to use. But we actually did not set the bit rate, so we still need to go into the menu to set the bit rate. So let me just hit the menu quick and show you where to set the bit rate. If we go down here and we go to video file type, that's where the bit rate is. So this is a 10-bit camera, so you're going to want to use, in my opinion anyways, H.265 10-bit. Now you do have NRAW is another option you can use, which is the file sizes are going to be larger, but it's 12-bit, so there's technically more data there. It's a little bit harder to process. You got to use DaVinci Resolve to process the raw files. But this is basically what I use, is the H.265 10-bit. Now if you notice here, it says tone mode on the bottom. If you hit the right arrow, if you go to the right, and that's where you can get to HLG, which is, you know, high dynamic range. It's a different log format, different log gamma. And then you have N-log. So N-log is kind of like, how I like to think about it, it's kind of like shooting raw photos for video. So you will have to process the footage in a processing software, and it looks kind of flat, so you have to add contrast, color, and sharpness. But you do get more dynamic range than you do if you shoot in SDR mode. SDR mode is pretty much like shooting JPEG. The camera does all the processing for you and just pumps out like a final result. So I actually think the camera does a great job in SDR mode, so I've been leaving it there for the most part, just because it's easier than processing the video files after the fact. But if you want the best quality possible, you are going to want to have that set to, you know, NRAW or BRAW. If you really want to try to get the most out of the camera. It's up to you. Like I said, it just depends on your, I guess, your processing skills and what you're up to on your computer and stuff like that. So now that we have the video format set and we have the file type set, we're good to go as far as recording video. So to start recording, you can just hit the record button and this red box comes up to let you know it's recording. And you can pretty much just touch around the screen to change the focus area, like so. But by default, it's going to focus on what it sees there as a subject, because we have subject detect on. And it sees a human, so it's going to focus on that. So you can stop recording by hitting the record button. And there we go. Now, again, if we go back into the iMenu, you have a couple other options now that we're in video mode. So you have microphone sensitivity. You can change that if you want here. It's set to auto because we're in auto mode. So auto is going to automatically try to get it, you know, to the optimized spot. And then over here we have focus mode. This is full-time AF is how it's set. So that's pretty much ideal for video. It'll just always be focusing. So no matter where you point the camera, it'll try to find focus for you. You got manual focus here. You have continuous AF, single AF as well. Now product review mode, if you turn this on, this will basically shut off the facial recognition. So again, if you're holding a product up, it'll focus on the product if you have this turned on. And then you also have on custom focus area. So you could also hit this button right here and you can change the focus area to, you know, a different size or whatever if you want, like so. And then you can move it around like that. Just click OK. A lot of features, a lot of power on this thing. Custom controls for video, that's where that is. Vibration reduction you have, same as photo mode. And electronic VR. So this is even more stabilization, but you could see it crops in. So it does crop in quite a bit, but this will give you a lot more stabilization. So if you're trying to walk with the camera hand holding, you might want to turn this on, for example. So at the cost of a crop, it will make your footage look a lot more stable. And sometimes you want that crop because if you're using a telephoto and you want even more zoom, you can turn this on and you get like another effective zoom. It'll still record in 4K. So that's pretty handy feature there. So you can use it for better stabilization and more zoom. Just going to leave that off for now. All right, so I just put it back into photography mode because I want to show you the picture control area. And that's what this is here. So right now it's set to auto, but you have all these different options. You got standard, neutral, vivid, monochrome, and there is a ton of options in here, guys. Deep tone monochrome, portrait, rich tone, landscape, flat. Then you have all these custom looks. These are like film emulation type looks, I believe, and they look really cool. I went through them earlier. So you have Dream, Morning, Pop, Sunday. These are like basically presets as to how the camera is going to process your photos. It's very cool, and you could use this for video as well, guys. Dramatic, Silence, Bleached, Pure, Denim, Toy, Sepia, Blue, Red, Pink, Charcoal, Graphite, Binary, and Carbon. So very cool, and there's a button for that you can just press to get in there. So I recommend, playing with some of that stuff because it's a lot of fun. So auto mode is quite powerful. It'll do a really good job like 90% of the time. So if you guys are just full-fledged beginners, I recommend leaving it in auto mode for now. Just get out there, use the camera, take some photos, take some video, and then come back, and when you're ready, and we can go into the more advanced modes where you can harness a little more power. The camera has a lot more power than what auto mode is offering. Like, you can control so many different things. But again, if you're like a beginner, it can be overwhelming. And I don't want you guys to get overwhelmed. I want you to have fun using your camera. So I want you to just get out there, start using it, get some great photos and videos and stuff like that. And once you're ready to try to get more power out of it, come back and we can switch to something like Program Auto. Now, Program Auto is still kind of like full auto, but it gives you more power. So if you notice, if I hit the I button, now I have more options in here that we can change. We have white balance, for example. So before, in full auto mode, you could not change the white balance. The white balance is basically how the camera figures out what white is. So you want it to be accurate, so you have accurate skin tones, for example. So if you're out in the sun, you can do natural light auto, direct sunlight, cloudy. So you do want to set the white balance to what you're actually doing. Auto does a good job most of the time, but sometimes it doesn't do a good job and you need to hard set it. And if you hit the down arrow, you can actually go in and adjust the settings for the white balance as well. So if we go back over here, you can actually set your color temperature as well, Kelvin. If we go down, you can actually put your color temperature in. And that's pretty helpful. Like my studio light here, for example, is a 5,000 degree light. So 5,000 is where I would want to set the camera for the light, to be the right white balance. So that's what that does. And if we go back here to A1, you can go down and you have keep white, reduce warm colors. Then we have keep overall atmosphere. Then we have A2, which is keep light warmer colors. I'm actually using A2 lately because I just like that little bit of a warmer look. So that's where I've had it. Now, by all means, guys, play with this stuff. It's your camera. See how, if you notice a difference, see what you like better on the skin tones and stuff. So that's what you can do there. And otherwise, it pretty much works the same as far as taking photos and video. So if we switch it to video mode and we hit the I button, you could see we now have the option for white balance. And we have the picture control that I talked about before. Like I said, it works in video mode also, so you can change that. I like standard mode. I'm just going to put it on standard mode. So I just put it back into photography mode. All right, so you remember this touch shutter button? I just wanted to show you something quick here. So if I change that to move focus point, watch what happens when I move the focus point. This little box comes up that says OK on it. So I'm moving the focus point around. So to get it back to default, that's what this OK button is for. You can just press that and now it's back to default where it'll select the subject. You can also hit the button on the back of the camera, that OK button, and that will also get rid of that. So I forgot to mention that earlier. Just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that. I was going to put it back to touch shutter. So in the menu system here, you have quite a bit more options when in program auto mode, like ISO sensitivity settings, for example. So if we go in here, so maximum ISO is set to 64,000, and you could raise that even more if you want. I'm just going to leave it at 64. That's high enough for me. Now, maximum sensitivity with flash, you can change that if you want. Now, minimum shutter speed, I wanted to show you. This is a cool feature. So right now it's set to auto, but you can hard set it to specific shutter speeds if you guys want. Like if you're doing sports or something like that, and you want to force it to be at like 1/2000th of a second, you could do that in here. But in auto mode, if you go to the right, you have this option. Now, this is a very interesting option, and I recommend playing with this if you need to. So if you guys are getting blurry photos, most likely it's because the camera is shaking too much and your shutter speed is too slow. So this is where you can go to speed it up. So right now, look, it thinks the camera's like on a tripod, and it's setting the shutter speed to 1/30th of a second. So if I go into the menu here, go over and make this, let's do faster 2. And now I press the shutter speed. Look, now I'm at 1/125th of a second. So it sped up the shutter speed quite a bit to help you get like a sharper shot if you're hand holding. So I like this feature. If you're trying to take a photo and like people are moving around like a little bit, you might want to increase the shutter speed just a little. And this is a really good way to do it using this mode here. You could also slow it down. So if you have the camera on a tripod and you're in a low light situation and you want to, get a slower shutter speed. So you can see now that the shutter speed is at 1/8 of a second. So that would be better like if on a tripod in lower light, for example. And also notice the ISO here. This is the camera sensor sensitivity, or the gain. Now at 1/8 of a second, it's at 160 is what the ISO is at. So check this out. When I move this to faster 2, now I'm at 1/125th of a second, and look how the ISO had to go up. So the gain of the camera basically had to go up to 2500 in order to achieve the faster shutter speed. So that's what the ISO is doing. The ISO is balancing the exposure based on what shutter speed the camera is choosing. And we're in program auto mode, so the camera is choosing the shutter speed for us. We're actually manipulating the shutter speed using that ISO sensitivity tool though. So these are all tools to help control the camera. Like I said, you get more power in program auto mode than you do in full auto mode. You can't change this stuff in full auto mode like this. So that's pretty much how that works. And I really wanted to show you the ISO sensitivity settings because it's such a cool feature. I use this all the time. So I'm just going to put it back to 0 for now. And now if you look at the ISO, it's at 800, well, 640, based on the current scene and the current shutter speed. So if I go back into the menu here, again, we're in photo mode and we scroll down. This is where you can actually change your picture controls. So you remember the button that we pressed here to get into the picture controls? You can actually adjust these. If you go over to the right, you can actually go in and actually manipulate these settings and save them, which is amazing. Lots of power. So you can come up with your own recipes for your own looks by manipulating these settings. And you can get an idea of what the settings are set to by looking at them in here. So you can go to this and then pick like vivid, for example, go over to the right, and then you'll see, some of the settings will be different for the vivid. Click OK. Put this back to standard. I like standard picture control. Now if we scroll down here, we have active dynamic lighting. That basically will just help protect the highlights, and it'll bring up the shadows a little bit if you have that turned on. It helps a little bit. I tend not to use it that much, but if you're finding your shadows are too dark and stuff, you can actually turn on the active dynamic lighting and it will help with that. You have all these different options in here: low, normal, high, and so forth. Long exposure noise reduction, you might want to turn that on depending on what you're up to, long exposures. The downside of having that on is after you take the long exposure, it has to process the image and it takes a couple seconds. So it's off by default. High ISO noise reduction, that's set to normal by default. That's fine. I would recommend leaving this on. Skin softening, you could turn that on if you want smoother skin. If you're taking portraits or you're recording video and you want smoother skin and stuff, you can actually turn this on, which is pretty helpful for people that want that. Photo flicker reduction. Now you can enable this if you're having issues with like flashing lights. Like sometimes LED lights will look like they're blinking depending on what the camera's shutter speed is at. So you can combat that by turning this on. And same thing with high frequency flicker reduction. That's another option here. And when you turn it on, you can actually fine tune the shutter speed and just until the lights stop blinking. So that's very helpful in certain situations. And by the way, this menu hierarchy is pretty vast. You got photo, video, then you got settings. Let me just continue going through this one. So metering mode here. Metering mode basically controls how the camera will expose the image. So matrix metering, this option here, will basically use the entire sensor and it'll put a little bit of emphasis on the center area. Center weighted metering will emphasize the center area. So it'll basically expose for the center area as the priority. of the camera. So this is just another tool to help manipulate how the camera is exposing your scene. Spot metering will just pick a little tiny spot in the center of the sensor and it'll just expose for that area. And then you have highlight weighted metering. Highlight weighted metering will protect the highlights. So it works great for if you're taking photos of really bright things like a light bulb or like white frothy water or like a wedding dress and you want all the detail of the white itself. You can have it set to highlight weighted metering. That's what that mode is for. Now we got some flash options here. Now release mode is the same as this button here. And that's how you can set the self timer and stuff like that. So let me just show you if I press this button here. Let me just change the metering mode. The metering mode, I have it set to highlight. Let me just put this back to matrix. And you can see how it changes a little bit when I switch the metering modes. Because it's basically manipulating how the camera is exposing the scene. So again, release mode is this button up here, but you can get to it in the menu as well. So you actually have to hold the button down. That's kind of hard to do with the screen out like this. So I'm just going to go into the menu and do it that way. So you have continuous shooting, you have high-speed continuous shooting, and you have really high-speed continuous shooting. So if I put it on continuous shooting high, and I focus, see how it's like now it's rapid firing. So that's what continuous shooting does. And that's under release mode. And then you have low speed, so it'll just go slower. And you can go in there and dial those settings in. Single frame will just take the one shot. So it'll focus and just take the one shot even though I'm holding the shutter down. So that's what single does. Then we have the self timer. So if we take the shot, you can see the self timer is now going off. You can see that green light flashing. And it'll take the shot. I think it's set to like 10 seconds. Yeah, 10 seconds by default. You can see here on the top for self timer. So now if I hold this button down, we can actually turn this and you can change the self timer to 5. I'm sorry, my thumb is blocking it. It's kind of hard to do. So we got all these different self timer settings, 10, 20, 30, and so forth. I'm going to set it to 2. And then the rear command dial here, you can change. These are the continuous modes. And notice on the top, you can change that to how many frames it'll shoot in that mode. So that's how that works. And then all the way over here, you have 15, 30 for the really hardcore modes. I'm just going to go in the menu here, switch this back to single frame, like so. Now if we go back into the menu here, focus mode, we already talked about that. Focus area, we already talked about that. Vibration reduction will link to the focus point. I recommend leaving that on. Auto bracketing, I just wanted to show you a couple more of these advanced features in photo mode. So auto bracketing is basically how you would take multiple exposures, and they call it bracketing. Now, if you turn it on, you have to go to the right on the directional pad to turn it on and off. So if you go right, it'll turn it off, right will turn it on. So by default, it is set to auto bracketing set with flash. I just want auto exposure bracketing here, like so. This is the number of shots it's going to take, and this is the increment. So how I like to have it set is 3 frames at a 2 EV spread. And when this is turned on, it'll basically take 3 shots at 3 different exposures. So if I hit the playback button here, we can scroll through and you can see these are the 3 different exposures. So this is the regular exposure, underexposed, and overexposed. So those are the 3 frames for the auto exposure bracketing. And you could then combine those 3 images in post-processing and get like really good results. So it's HDR photography, it's called. And it's great for super high dynamic range scenes, like inside like an old building that's like dark with like lights and stuff. Might be an example of where you would want to use HDR. Or if you're outside, but you also want to see in a dark area, like HDR is a good option for that. And you can actually see it on the right of the screen here, the lines on that meter. And that's how you know you have auto exposure bracketing on. It also has a little icon right there, the AE bracket, so you can see that as well. So I'm just going to go in there and turn that off by hitting the right on the directional pad there. and then I'll hit menu to go back. Now you have multi-exposure mode. This is another mode where it'll actually take multiple exposures, but it'll combine them and like blend them based on what option you choose. So you have different modes. You have overlay mode, you got lighten, darken, add, and it basically creates a composite of multiple exposures. So it'll like give you like a ghost effect of like two images combined sort of thing. It's fun to play with. I recommend checking it out. Now HDR overlay is kind of like auto HDR. So this will automatically take several exposures, combine them for you, and pump out a final result. So it's a fun feature to play with, and you don't have to do any of the processing. The camera does all the processing for you, and you can control some of the settings in here, and you can also save individual pictures as RAWs if you want, which is pretty powerful. Now, interval timer shooting, this is a pretty advanced feature. This is where you can go for hardcore time lapses. So you can set the what time you want it to start, how long the interval is going to be, how many shots. So basically it records photos for X amount of time, and then you could turn it into a high quality time-lapse video. That's what interval shooting is for. You got options in here, focus before each shot and stuff like that, just depending on what you're doing. And this is where you go to set the number of shots. So you can set, thousands of shots if you want. That's what that does. Now, time-lapse video. This is a good way to get turnkey time-lapse video on the camera. So another great feature. You can enable this here, and we got settings for it as well. And it's asking you what file type to set. So I would recommend setting this to the highest quality possible. Now, focus shift shooting. This is basically focus stacking. So this is good for macro photography. So it'll focus and take multiple shots at different focus points or focus distances, and then you can combine those photos in a program like Photoshop for focus stacking purposes. Most common application for this is close-up product photography, macro photography sort of stuff. When the depth of field is extremely narrow, you got to take multiple focus points and then combine them to get the whole subject sharp. And again, it's really for close-up photography in particular. Now, pixel shift shooting is a really advanced mode where the camera will take 16 photos and it actually just moves the sensor around a little bit. So you want to be on a tripod when you do this, and it'll combine all those images and give you this crazy high resolution image. So that's what pixel shift shooting is. All right, so now we're going down into the video mode area, and I just wanted to show you, you got the file naming options. You can change if you want. In here, if you go over, you could change what the file is going to be called, so you could put Z52 or something like that if you wanted. So this way the file would actually have the camera name, for example. A lot of these settings are very similar to photo mode. You got skin softening for video as well. You got the flicker reduction and stuff, metering mode, focus mode. A lot of the same options here for video mode here. You got self timer for video, you can enable that. Electronic vibration, remember that crops in a little bit, but it'll give you more stabilization. You got microphone sensitivity. You got an attenuator there you can turn on and off if you want. Frequency response, it's set to wide, but you could limit that if you want to vocal range, so it'll be a little bit better for, music, or if you're recording a singer or something like that. Wind noise reduction, you can turn that on and off. Mic jack, you can have plug-in power on or off. You got headphone volume, that's where you can go to change that if you're monitoring the audio. Time code is a pretty powerful feature where it'll keep track of, the video footage based on time. And if you have time code set on multiple cameras, it'll easily be able to sync up the footage. So that's what time codes are for. External record control, this is for if you want to be able to control you over the HDMI. And that's pretty much it for the video settings. Now, if we go down here to custom settings menu, this is where all the other options are. And we have all these different letters here. So focus, metering, timers, shooting display, bracketing, flash, controls, and video. So there's basically more video features in video, and control is going to have more control features and so forth. So if we go into focus here, these are all the options. And like I said, guys, this camera is extremely powerful when it comes to all of this stuff. So you can change a lot of different features in here. I'm not going to go over everything, but there's a couple of things I wanted to show you. You can change your ISO step value. If you don't want it to go every third of a step, you can make it more. So this option here is going to prioritize faces for the metering mode. So that's on by default. You can turn it off and then it'll just average the scene. But if there's a face in the scene, it will prioritize the face for the metering. So I recommend leaving that on, but that's what that feature is. So now we're in the timer area, self timer, power off delay. So pre-release capture options I wanted to show you. This is a powerful feature where the camera will basically take photos before you actually take them. So it'll be buffering the photos, and when you actually press the shutter button to take the photos, it'll go back in time and you'll get like a second beforehand, you know, like photos recorded for you. So why you might want to use this is if you're trying to get like a bird, you know, like leaving the nest is like the easiest example I could think of. Like, you know, it's about to take off and you want to get it like right when it leaves the nest sort of thing. You can have pre-capture enabled, and then so by the time you hit the shutter, you kind of missed it because it launched already, but it'll go back that second and you'll get the shot. So that's what pre-release capture is for. I recommend checking that out if you're doing stuff like that. Now, shutter type in here, we have auto, mechanical shutter, and electronic shutter. I recommend just leaving it in auto, and it will switch to electronic if it needs to. Like if you're using silent mode, for example, it needs to switch to electronic shutter. You can actually add more shutter speeds if you want in manual mode there, if you enable that. Now you got grid types here. You can add a grid. You can see there's all different grid options. I like the 3x3 option. So this is where you can go to customize the viewfinder. So in here, these are the different modes when you hit the display button. Remember how we were cycling through the modes? These are the different modes. And that's what we got. So custom monitor shooting display. And you could uncheck these. Like if you don't want this one or you don't want this one, for example, you can uncheck it. And this is for photo, by the way. The other option is for video. You can change when you're in video mode. I'll show you that in a second. This is where you can go to customize the eye menu. So you can change what's actually in the eye menu here if you want. So let's just say we want to get rid of the airplane mode. You can change that to some other option that you might want, like focus peaking or whatever it might be. Shutter type, release mode, pre-release options. Like I said, you can set that to whatever you want. I'll set it to silent mode. So if I want to silent the camera, I could just select that now and the camera will be in silent mode. So that's how you can customize the eye menu. Now you got custom controls for shooting. We already talked about that, but that's where you can go and customize the controls there. Now I just wanted to go in here to video to show you some of these video options. So you have AF speed for video. So that's autofocus speed. You can change that in here. And this will actually change how, when you're focusing from one subject to another, how quickly it goes. So if you want a nice slow autofocus transition, you can actually change the AF speed and lower that to slower. And you'll get a nice, like a more cinematic sort of autofocus transition. That's what this does. I use this feature all the time. Now, AF tracking sensitivity, this is like how likely it will be to switch from one subject to another, like how sticky it is on a certain subject. So you can set it to high or low depending. I just leave it in the middle for the most part, but you might have to change that if it keeps grabbing something and you don't want it to do that. Now, view assist, this is for if you're shooting in N-Log. So it'll basically simulate a little bit more better like what the camera is seeing if you turn this on. So it's up to you guys. If you want to use N-Log and you really want to learn more about it, my buddy Josh sat and created an excellent video on how to expose for N-Log and how to set the camera up and stuff for proper exposure when using N-Log. So I will link that video below in the description area. He did a really great job, and it's like a 20-minute long video or whatever because it is pretty thorough and it's kind of in-depth when shooting N-Log. There's a lot of other things to keep track of. So I recommend watching his video on that because he did such a good job. There's no reason to make another one when there's already one out there like that. So, but anyways, view assist is for that. It's for when you're shooting like N-Log or N-RAW. You can enable that there and it'll help simulate what the scene looks like for you. Zebra pattern is another exposure tool. It's great for when shooting N-Log as well. Now, brightness information display, by default it is set to histogram, but if you go in here you can set it to waveform, and waveform's awesome for video, and you can have it set to a large waveform as well if you need a bigger one. So let me put the camera in video mode quick. So I have it set to waveform, but I don't have the monitor shooting display set for waveform yet. So look, if we go into monitor shooting display, remember there's one for photo and video, and now we're in video mode. So this is an important setting I wanted to show you. See how there's no waveform option here? You got the auto leveler, you got the regular, and then you have nothing. So if I go here, I can actually hit the right arrow and I can add more stuff. So if I scroll down, here's the brightness information. So now there's the waveform. So we basically have waveform added now if I hit menu. So now if I hit the display button, you could see there's the waveform. And the waveform will change based on what's in front. It's a really awesome exposure tool that's super helpful for checking exposure. Again, especially when you're using N-Log and stuff like that. So, and I can hit the display button now to cycle and get rid of that, but that's one of the options. So to check exposure, you could just cycle to this view, then hit the display button and then start recording, for example. So that's a very cool feature that for some reason is kind of buried in the menu. So I wanted to show you that quick. And you can do the same thing here for the viewfinder. You can add, like say on this one, it's up to you guys if you want to have it in the viewfinder as well. Just go over to the right and then you can add it right here by adding brightness information. I'm just going to leave that at default though for now. Now the frame indicator is that red box that comes up on the screen when you hit record, which I like. So here's the playback menu area, and there's a bunch of options in here that you can mess around with. Nothing really too complicated here. Picture review is if basically when you take a photo, it'll come up on the screen for a couple of seconds, like automatically, and that's off by default. So if you want that to do that, you have to turn this on. Now down here is the setup menu. And this is where you go to format the memory card. Now, I recommend formatting the memory card when you put it in there because it creates an image index for the camera itself. So you definitely want to format your memory card when you first turn the camera on. So please do that. You do that right here. If you go over to the right, you can just select slot 1, hit yes, and it'll format the card. Now, here's where you can go and set the date and time. So you can go in here, set the date and time. I like going to just date and time like this. It's 2025, the date is actually correct, and the time is actually correct. So it's in 24-hour increments. So right now it's 1327, which is 1:30 basically. Just going to click OK. So that's where you go to set the time. Daylight savings time, you can have that on or off. Now monitor brightness, this is a very important feature. If you go in here, you can change how bright the monitor is, and you can see just how bright it goes. So when you're outside, this is very helpful to jack that up, but you can see the screen pretty good by default, but if you need more, that's where you can go. And then if you're in like really dark conditions, you can get the monitor nice and low so it's not like blinding you in the dark, you know. You actually have monitor color balance, viewfinder brightness you can change, viewfinder display size, so when you look through the viewfinder here, you can make it smaller if you want. So if you have glasses like I do, your eye is like a little bit away from the back of the camera when you put your eye up to it. It's like a little bit further away because of my glasses. So the smaller viewfinder display makes it easier to see like the corners and stuff. The standard, I really have to smash my eye to the viewfinder to see like up and down and stuff. So that's what this option is. So I actually prefer it on small just because I have glasses. So you might want to change that one depending on your situation. Now you can limit the monitor mode selection. By default, it has all these different options. Remember I was telling you can switch between the viewfinder and the monitor. You can limit how many options are in there if you want. Now auto temperature cutout, I recommend putting this on high. This will allow the camera to get hotter before it shuts off. And this has pretty good cooling on it, so it really, I never had a problem with it using it in the city, and it was really hot in the city. But just so you know, if your camera is giving you temperature warnings, you can set this to high and then it'll go a lot longer before you have to like shut it off to cool down. So you might run into that if you're recording 4K 60 for a really long time. You might start seeing temperature warnings coming up on the screen. So this is where you can go to like combat that with the high option. Then we got sensor cleaning, pixel mapping, copyright info. You can add your copyright information in here and it'll embed it into your files. I recommend doing that. If you're sharing stuff online, high resolution and stuff, you might want to do that. You got voice memo options, camera sounds. This is where you can go to turn the beep off when you focus and stuff. It's off by default, but you can change that in here. And you can actually change the pitch of it too, which is interesting. Here's silent mode, touch controls. So if you don't want touch controls, you can turn that off here and then the monitor won't do anything when you touch it. Self-portrait mode, that's just when you flip it the camera into selfie mode, it'll automatically assume that you're in self-portrait mode. So that's what that feature does. You can turn it off here though if you don't want it to do that. Here's your HDMI options. Here's your USB connection options. So whether you're uploading or if you want to have it set as like a web camera, for example. Battery information. So this will give you detailed information on your battery, which is very nice. USB power delivery is on by default, so that's cool, but you can actually turn that on there. Now you have, if your battery is getting low, guys, and you don't have another battery and you just need to hang on a little longer, you can actually go into energy saving photo mode here and you'll get more life out of your camera. So this is great if you just are in one of those situations where your battery's dying and you just need it to last longer. So it's kind of like a low energy mode on your cell phone or something. So this is referring to if you have a memory card in there, it'll still take the photo if it's set to OK. So here is where you can save menu settings if you want. So you can actually save all your camera settings, your custom settings and stuff, and write it to the memory card. Then you can import them into another camera. Like if you have two Nikons, for example, you can import those settings by saving them and then loading them. So that's what this feature does. And then here's where you can go and reset all your settings, which is what I did before I started this video. And then you have firmware version. So just so you know, this camera is at version 1 at the time of this video, guys. So this might get firmware updates as the years go by. So there might be more features available, you know, in the future, and the firmware will be different than what I'm using right now, just so you know. So if we go down one more, this is the network area, and this is where you can go to put the camera in airplane mode, the Nikon Cloud, connect to smart device. They have an app called like the Bridge app or something it's called for the Nikon cameras, so you can remote control the camera with the app and stuff like that. Now you got Bluetooth remote control options, so if you have a Bluetooth remote or you're trying to connect it to a gimbal that has Bluetooth remote, you can enable it here, and that'll make your life a lot easier to use remote controls and stuff, especially if you're away from the camera or something like that and you want to use the remote. Connect to computer options, FTP server, connect to other cameras, has Atmos Bluetooth options as well. So you got your USB protocols, router frequency, so this is for your Wi-Fi, and you got MAC address information. Now down here is the My Menu area, and this is an awesome area. This is where you can go and save all those important items that you might need in the camera. So for example, if I scroll down, monitor brightness, I want to add monitor brightness. I have monitor brightness is in the My Menu area, so I can just get to that really easily and I don't have to scroll through the menu trying to find where monitor brightness is. So I like adding that. Now if we go down here into video, and we scroll down, I like having the AF speed in there. So I'm going to add that. And now you can see we have AF speed and monitor brightness in there, which is pretty cool. Alright guys, so now we are going to head into part 2, which I'm calling it part 2, but it's really just moving on to the more powerful creative modes. So for starters, we have shutter priority mode. Now, first thing I want to do, I'm going to change the lens. I also have a 50mm f1.4 lens here, which is absolutely killer, by the way, and it's going to be a little bit easier to demonstrate depth of field and aperture mode, so I just want to switch to this lens now. So that's ready to go when we get there. Let me just pop this off quick. Alright, so there we go. Now we are all set for this lens. Let me swivel the screen out here. Alright guys, so here we are in shutter priority mode. You can see the S on the top here. I'm in photography mode right now as well, not video mode. And you can see down here with this square box, that is the shutter speed. And when I turn the main command dial, you can see the shutter speed changing. So that's pretty much how that works. And also note that I'm in auto ISO here. So if I press the ISO button down, you could see auto ISO 100. And then if I turn the sub command dial, I can actually turn auto ISO off. So now it's just locked at ISO 100. And if I turn the main command dial, I can actually change the ISO. And this is going to adjust like the minimum ISO pretty much. So watch, now it's at 400. And if I turn the sub command dial, you can see how auto comes back on. So now if I let go, basically the minimum ISO is now 400, but it's still in auto. So it's a pretty cool way to set your minimum ISO basically. It kind of works like that auto minimum shutter speed option, sort of, but it's this time we're actually adjusting the ISO for that purpose, which is how that feature kind of works. But I really like how Nikon handles this situation. So shutter priority, again, gives you control over the shutter, but you can also manipulate that with the ISO, which is what I wanted to tell you. So I'm just going to put this back to 100 here and leave it in auto ISO. We'll switch that to a hard ISO when we get to manual mode, when I show you a little bit more how to manipulate exposure and stuff using manual mode. But in shutter priority, this is pretty much what you do. You just turn the dial to get the shutter you want. So for example, if I put this at like 1/500th of a second and I aim over here, let me just touch over by where the fan is. Now watch this. If I go into the playback menu, you'll see that the fan motion is frozen. So it froze the action. That's because I had the shutter speed fast enough at 1/500th of a second. So now watch when I lower the shutter speed down. Let's put it at like, whatever, 1/8 of a second. I'll spin that fan again. So now when we go back in the playback menu, you can see the motion is now captured. So that's what shutter speed does. It controls time. How long is the shutter mechanism open for? That's how you need to think about it. So when you have a slower shutter speed, the shutter is going to be open longer. And if there's anything moving in front of the camera or in front of the sensor, it's going to capture that motion. So you just saw what happened with the fan there. So that's pretty much how it would work with like blurry water. If you want the water to look softer and blurrier, you would slow the shutter speed down. And then if you're doing action and sports and things like that, you need to speed the shutter up. So for sports, I would be at a minimum 1/500th of a second, but high speed sports, you're definitely going to want it faster, 1/1000, 1/2000th of a second, like for outdoor high speed sports, for sure. Like you're going to want to freeze it and get it perfect. So the higher the shutter speed, the better, depending on the light situation. I find like in gymnasiums and stuff, the light is so much lower that it's really hard to get shutter speeds that fast without having an extremely fast lens like something like this. Otherwise, you end up pushing it to like ISO 64,000, for example, or something insanely high, and it's just a little too noisy for it to be like a good shot sort of thing. So just a little food for thought there. So I tend to go with a little bit slower of a shutter speed inside gymnasiums, but it doesn't always freeze the action perfectly. You'll get a little bit of motion blur here and there. But if you're rapid firing, some of the shots will come out really good. So it just depends on your situation, how fast of an aperture you have on your lens, so you can keep that ISO at a reasonable value with that really fast shutter speed. All right, so I just want to switch it to video real quick to show you what it looks like in video mode. It's pretty much the same situation. I can hit the display button to change what I'm looking at. And if you turn the dial, you can set the shutter speed. So because I'm shooting 4K 24, I'm going to want this at like 1/150th of a second, because remember, when recording video, you want to have the shutter speed double what the frame rate is, ideally. So I'm shooting 24p, so ideally I would want the shutter speed at 1/48th of a second, but we don't have that on this camera. Cinema cameras and some other cameras do have that. They'll have shutter angle, for example, which will automatically double whatever the shutter speed is type thing. But in this case, I would have it at 1/50th of a second. Now, if I was shooting 4K 60, I would have it at 1/20th of a second, like ideally, right? I want to double the 60. So that's kind of rule of thumb when it comes to shutter speed when recording video. Now, in bright conditions, it's going to be very hard to do this with a fast lens like this. So what you would need to do is put a filter on the front of the lens to get this slow shutter speed in bright conditions. And what these filters are called are ND filters. And how I like to think about it is basically like putting sunglasses on the front of the lens. So you're basically shading the sensor a little bit with that tinted glass, which allows you to get a slower shutter speed. Now, what I tend to use is the Nisi variable ND filters, and they're variable, so you can actually adjust the amount of darkness on the ND filter, and that's very helpful for dialing in your shutter speed depending on what the lighting conditions are. So I like the variable NDs, but they make just hard stop NDs as well that are a little bit more affordable. I will have the one I use linked below in the description area, and I'll also have a more affordable version because the one I have is kind of expensive, but it's a really good one. And the more you spend on that stuff, the less color cast influence you're going to get, because there is like a color shift when you start slapping filters in front of the lens, just so you guys are aware in case you're not. So before we leave shutter priority, I just put it back in photography mode. I wanted to show you what happens when you keep slowing down here. So watch when I keep slowing down. 8, 30. So now I'm in 30 seconds. So you can go all the way to 30 seconds in shutter priority mode. That's what I wanted to show you quick. So let's put it in aperture priority mode. So now we are in aperture priority mode and we are in photography mode. So aperture is right here and it is measured in f-stops. So f-stops basically measure the aperture diaphragm, which is like that thing inside the lens that closes down. It kind of looks like the pupil of your eye. So the lower the aperture number, the wider the aperture is. So f1.4, you can see here on the lens, 1.4 is the fastest aperture. And by fast, that means the most open. And that means it's going to allow the most light in, and it's going to give you basically a faster shutter speed when you have all that light available. All right, so aperture also controls depth of field. Now, you could see here in the image that the fan is really blurry in the background. All right, so watch what happens when I change the aperture, and I have to use the sub command dial for the aperture. That's how it's set by default. So I'm using my pointer finger here. You remember the shutter speed was back here, this dial. So when we go into manual mode, it'll stay that way, which does kind of make sense. So when I change the aperture, watch how the background will get more and more sharp. So at like f16, you could see the fan blades are noticeably more sharp. Now watch when I back it off back to f1.4, you can see just how blurry it is. That's what depth of field is. So depth of field is measured, you know, it's like a sliver of sharpness basically. So whatever you focus on, you're going to get sharpness in front of the subject you focused and sharpness behind the subject you focused. And the depth of field is like that sliver of sharpness. And it basically just falls off. So like wherever the focus point is, sharpness is going to fall off in both directions from that point. And the larger the aperture number, the higher the aperture number, the more depth you're going to get. So the fatter that sliver of sharpness is going to be. So for example, when shooting portraits, if you want a nice blurry background, I would have it set at f1.4 with this lens, and you can see how blurry that fan is. And the fan is only about 12 inches behind the subject here. So imagine if the fan was, you know, 3 feet behind it, it would be like totally blurry. So when you see some of those sample photos that I took in the Z5 II review, which I recommend you check out, I used this lens for a lot of those shots, and the background blur just creates unbelievable 3D. The way the lights render looks super cool with fast aperture lenses. So now if I was to take a landscape scene and I want everything sharp from the front to the back, that's when I would stop this down. And that stopping down refers to raising the aperture number, or basically closing down the aperture diaphragm. So the higher the number this is, the more closed the pupil of the lens is going to be. So again, I would be shooting at like minimum f8, f10, f11 area if I was shooting landscapes and I wanted, you know, everything from the background to the foreground sharp. And I would focus like a third of the way into the scene pretty much when doing a landscape if I wanted to get everything sharp. And it also depends on what type of lens you're using. If you're using more of a wider angle lens, it's not as critical to have the aperture as high. If you're using more of a lens like this, more of a telephoto, you are going to have to raise that number more, because there's another factor that comes into play called telephoto compression, and it does affect depth of field. So for example, if I'm taking portraits of a subject and I'm at like 5 feet, I can have it set to like f1.4, and the subject will be pretty sharp. Their nose will be sharp, their eyes will be sharp, their ears will start to get just a little bit blurry, but they'll still be relatively sharp. And now, if I was shooting with a lens that was like 150 millimeter, for example, at like f2, that only the person's eyes would be sharp. So because of the telephoto compression. So I would have to stop down that telephoto lens to like f4, f5, 6 if I wanted the whole face to be sharp. So that's how telephoto also affects depth of field. Now, I know that might be a little bit advanced of a concept, but that's basically how it works. How I could illustrate that here is just by moving the subject closer. So if I get closer to the subject, you could see now the background is even more blurry. So to get this subject totally sharp, it's actually not quite focusing. All right, right there. So to get this subject all the way sharp, like the whole head of this little doll, I would need to stop it down to like f2.8 probably, just because I'm at like the minimum focus distance. But if I were to move the doll back here, for example, I could probably get away with f2 and everything would be sharp. But I would still shoot it at f1.4 for maximum background blur. That's just how I like to do things. But anyways, that's pretty much how Aperture works. And again, it works by changing the size of the lens diaphragm inside the lens. That's what the aperture actually is doing. It's like a physical mechanism that's changing inside the lens. When I put the camera in video mode, you could see it's pretty much the same thing. I can control the aperture here with the sub command dial. And that's how it works. You can also mess with the ISO. Right now it's in auto ISO, but you could change that like I showed you a minute ago in shutter priority if you want to. And that's where we're at there. So now we are going to go into manual mode, and I'm going to put it into photography mode in manual mode. And you can see right out of the gate, because the shutter speed is set to 30 seconds, that the image is overexposed. So because manual mode gives you full power, you are in charge of the exposure. When you're doing shutter priority mode, the camera is changing the aperture and the ISO for you to get the correct exposure. When you're in aperture priority mode, the camera is changing the shutter speed and the ISO to get you a proper exposure. Now remember, you could manipulate that exposure using exposure compensation, or you could use the metering modes to help dial that in depending on what you're working on. But in manual mode, you just have straight up full control. So what you look at is this meter on the right side, and that meter is basically telling us that we are way overexposed. Now, while we're here at the 30-second mark, I just wanted to show you, if you go one further, you could now go into bulb mode. And bulb mode is only available in manual mode, and you kind of need a remote release for bulb mode because you don't want to be shaking the camera when you touch it. But how bulb mode works is you basically start the exposure by pressing the shutter button down, and then when you let go, that's your exposure, however long you were holding it. So that's why they call it bulb, because there used to be this like little bulb that you would hold in your hand that would hold the shutter open for you back in the day, and it was controlled like by air. Now they have electronic remotes and stuff that do it, or you can use the remote control via your smartphone app for this purpose. But if I go into the playback menu, you could see that the exposure was way overexposed, which makes sense because I had the shutter speed open for so long in these bright conditions. So let's just turn the shutter speed down here. You can watch as it goes down. And let's put it at something reasonable, like 1/60th of a second, something like that. And also note that you can have auto ISO enabled in manual mode, which I would recommend using most of the time because it just makes your life easier. So the ISO will fill in the gaps for you if you have it in auto. So let's say I want to have the camera at f1.4 and 1/60th of a second. The ISO is already picking the correct, number to get the correct exposure. Now, if I hold the ISO button down and turn auto off, now you can see it's underexposed a little bit. And again, you can tell by looking at the meter over here. You could see those little lines. That's telling us how much underexposed we are. So watch when I open up the shutter speed, so the shutter is a little bit slower. You could see on the meter how those lines are going away. So right here, it's at 0 on the meter. So that's a correct exposure according to what the camera is seeing. Now again, you can overexpose if you need to. Like if I want to brighten up the shadows a little bit here, you can go up a little bit or you can go down a little bit. This is basically what exposure compensation does when you're in shutter priority, aperture priority, and program auto, for example. It's doing exactly what we're doing right now, except we're taking charge in full manual mode. So that's a 0 exposure at ISO 100. Now watch when I speed up the shutter here. So let's say we want the shutter speed at 1/500th of a second. You can see right now, 500 f1.4, there's not much I can do to make the scene any brighter. Raising the aperture is not going to make it brighter. It's only going to make it darker. And I can't open up the aperture anymore because we're fully open at f1.4. So the only option now is to raise the ISO. So I'm going to press the ISO button and use the command dial and watch the meter. And once I get that to 0, right there, that's where we need it. So we're going to need to be at ISO 2000 f1.4 to have a 1/500th shutter speed in these current lighting conditions. So that's how manual mode works. Now watch what happens when I raise the aperture up to like f2.8 or something like that. You could see now that the meter is underexposed. So we have two options to fix this. We can either raise the ISO or we could lower the shutter speed. Because remember, the exposure triangle uses all three tools. You got ISO, you got aperture, and you got shutter speed. So we're going to raise the ISO here to fix the exposure. I'm just going to raise it up and you can watch the meter. So now we're at ISO 8000. So that was one way to fix it. So let me lower that back down to 2000. And now I'm going to change the shutter speed. So if we watch the meter and lower the shutter speed, you could see right there, 1/125th of a second gives us a proper exposure at f2.8 and the ISO is at 2000. So let's open up the aperture to like f2 or f1.8, say we're going to take a portrait, and now it's definitely overexposed. So what we need to do is we could either raise the shutter speed or we could lower the ISO. And remember, ISO is like the gain of the sensor. So you're basically like turning the volume up on the sensor itself. So it's making it like more sensitive to light capture is how I like to think about it. So it definitely is manipulating the exposure, very similar to how aperture and shutter speed work. So we could now raise the shutter speed, and if we watch the meter, we can get that exposure right where we want it. So at f1.8, ISO 2000, we're looking at 1/320 of a second. Ideally, guys, in case you're unaware, you kind of want to have your shutter speed at minimum what the focal length of the lens is if you're hand holding. Now, if you have a super steady hand, you could definitely go slower than that. But again, if you're using like the 24 to 200 millimeter, like at 200 millimeter, you're going to want the shutter speed at a minimum 1/200th of a second. You know, so the vibration reduction and the sensor stabilization will absolutely help with that. But that is like the rule of thumb when it comes to shutter speed and focal length. So right now we are at f1.4, 1/50th of a second, and we're at ISO 100, and you can see there we are still underexposed. So we need to raise up that ISO. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to put auto ISO back on by using the sub command dial. And you can see the little auto come up. And now it put it at 250 there. So that's what the camera chose for a proper exposure. Now again, I could have just dialed that in myself, but why not use the tools of the camera to your advantage? And this is why, for the most part, I use auto ISO in manual mode unless I'm like demanding to get a specific exposure, like for astrophotography, for example. That stuff you definitely want to dial in all of it, you know? Or if you're using flash photography, you're going to want to dial in those settings because the flash is going to shoot out all that light. So the camera doesn't really know what's going on in that regard when using full manual. If you're using off-camera flash, for example. On-camera flash, it'll kind of figure it out for the most part. This is just like basic rule of thumb because this is more of a beginner's guide. So that's pretty much how the camera works in manual, aperture, and shutter speed. Now, remember when I was saying how you can set these custom control modes up for your given settings. So let's just say I want to have this set like this. In my studio, this is a pretty good setup. If I go into the I menu here, I can set the quality to whatever I want. Right now it's set to JPEG, that's fine. I could set my focus area to whatever I want, my focus mode as well. And I could set my vibration reduction, like if I was going to have one set up for sports, I might put this on sport mode, for example. But anyways, these are the settings I want. So if we go into the menu here, all right, so guys, if you go into the little wrench area, like where you set your time and stuff like that, and the language that we talked about earlier, and you're formatting your memory card and whatnot, save user settings. If you go over here, see this? So you can save it to U1, U2, and U3. So if I go over to the right, I can save the settings. So now these settings are saved in U1. So watch this. Let's change the shutter, the aperture, the shutter speed, right? So now we're at 1/250th, f2.8. So watch what happens when I put it to U1. It just recalled our settings. And it remembers a lot of the other settings like I showed you in the I menu. It remembers all of that stuff. So you can have 3 independently controlled settings, like one for portraits, one for landscapes, one for sports, just as an example. And then just when you're on the scene, you can quickly change from one to the other sort of situation. So very powerful. I highly recommend using the user presets for your just speed and efficiency when you're out in the field, especially if you're multitasking, like at a wedding or anything like that where there's a lot going on. You might need a faster shutter speed for this shot and then a slower shutter speed for that shot, sort of thing. You might be changing lenses, and that can affect the settings that you want to use. So let's go into the playback menu here. I'm just going to hit the playback button, and I just wanted to show you how the playback menu works a little bit. So you can scroll through the images by using the command dials, as you can see here. So if we hit the zoom out button here on the back of the camera on the bottom, this is where you can go to get like a different view of things. So you can see all your images. You could zoom in. You can keep zooming in like so to really inspect. And then you can click and drag to move around if you want. And if you hit this button here on the bottom left, it'll put the face right in the center. Like, how cool is that? So it knows that it was using facial recognition when it captured this photo. So again, when you zoom in, it might not be centered, like something like this by default. You could just tap that and it'll put the face right in the center so you can check the eye. You could also use the joystick to move around. So now if we go into the menu here and we go into the playback area, we got playback display options. So this is powerful. I wanted to show you this. So this is where you can go and enable focus point. I recommend enabling that, and it'll literally show you where the camera focused on the playback menu so you can see it. It won't be there on the image like when you share it or anything, but in the playback menu it'll show you. So you can mark the first shot in a series. So if you're taking rapid fire photos in bursts, for example, it'll consider that a series and it'll mark the first shot of that series. So that's pretty helpful when you're going through your photos trying to find a specific photo. Now you got exposure info. I like having that on. Highlights will basically, they'll blink if the highlights are blown out. You might want that enabled if you're, checking for that, if that's important to you. RGB histogram, I like that. It's more information and it'll show you all the color channels so you can see if any of the channels are blowing out in harder to judge situations. You got shooting data. I'm going to leave that so you can tell how the camera was set. And then you got overview, picture only. And then you got file info. So I just enabled everything so you guys can see how this looks. So again, playback options is where that is. So all this stuff is turned off by default, which I don't know, it's just different than how Sony and Canon works in that regard. So now if I go back in the playback menu and I hit the display button, we have all these different options now. So here's the shooting info. Here's the RGB histogram so you can see each channel. Because remember, the camera is using red, green, and blue to make all the colors. That's what is on the sensor. It has like an array of those colors. So if we hit the display button again, now we have all this info here. So a lot of different information. It'll tell you everything, white balance, all that, what the camera chose. This is extremely powerful, especially if you are trying... This is extremely powerful, especially if you're trying to dial in settings to get the skin tones just right, for example. You could look in here and be like, ooh, this one looked great. Let me use that setting, and so forth. Now, you have another info here. This one probably don't need. This is just extra information. And here's even more information. And here's even more information. So there's a lot going on there. You probably don't need all those check boxes, but I just wanted to show you. This one's really good, though, because this one will show you just the basic information pretty quickly. And then you have this one, which is nothing at all. And then we're back to all these other options. All right, guys, so I think we got pretty much everything covered from a beginner-oriented perspective here. So if you guys have any questions, be sure to ask below in the comments area, and I'll try my best to answer. There's so many features in this menu system, so I didn't go through everything, obviously. I just went through the main stuff that I think beginners are going to need to know, like where they're at and things like that. So just keep that in mind. I'll have a link below for the online manual, which is actually really good. And if you search like a specific setting or something like that, it'll come up in the manual, and then you can like read about it. And it's actually not bad. Like the descriptions are pretty good for some of those more advanced settings, like if you want to drill down on exactly how to set them up and stuff like that. So, all right, guys, I appreciate you watching my video. Please be sure to give me a thumbs up if you found this helpful, and it'd be super cool if you hit that subscribe button as well. All right, take care.